Think of traveling, should you do it or not? Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am so excited about this video. Some of you might already know that I'm in Zambia, so this video is about how I made it to Zambia in these times. How did I make it to Zambia in COVID? So I actually posted some questions. I asked people to ask me some questions so I can record this video. And I asked the people on Instagram, so if you're not following me on Instagram, you better start following me so you can also ask questions in the future. So this is really about how the trip was, do I have any regrets, and so on. So if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, you better do it right now. So I have about 10 questions that I'll have to go through. And I am really excited to share with you my experience. If you're thinking of traveling, if you're thinking of traveling, should you do it or not? So let's get into this video. So the first question I was asked was, did I have to take a COVID test? And that's yes, you cannot travel without a COVID test. So every country is requiring that you do a PCR test. That's because there's like the antigen test, but every country is requiring that you do the PCR test. And the only difference is that different countries have different time frames. So for example, we flew through Amsterdam. So we flew from Frankfurt to Amsterdam to Nairobi to Zambia. So we went through like 2 countries in between. Unfortunately, there are no direct flights to Zambia. So I went to Amsterdam and then Nairobi, and they each had different time points. So although in Zambia you needed 7 days, like your PCR test should have been done within the 7 days, but in Amsterdam they required 72 hours, and I think in Kenya they required 96 hours. So because we're going through all these other countries, that meant that we had to have a test that was more recent, although Zambia required 7 days. So that's all I can say, that even though you might, if you're going to be traveling, if you're going to be in transit in other countries before your final destination, it's really important to check like what tests are they, like what hours are they requiring, because each country has got their own thing. So just pay attention to that for sure. So we had to do a PCR test for at least all the countries. And then we had to also do an antigen test for the Netherlands. The Netherlands requires that you do an antigen test 4 hours before departure. Our flight was at around 6, so we left the house at around 1 in the morning. So 6 in the morning, that's what I mean. So it was around 1 in the morning that we left the house, and we went to the airport, and then around 5 they had in Frankfurt, you have a testing center at the airport, so that was super handy. So around 5 that was open and we could do the antigen test. So the Netherlands requires that this is done 4 hours before you leave, and that was just like annoying because it's extra money for nothing. Like we were just in transit for 3 hours in the Netherlands, but we still needed to do that test even though we're in transit. So I would really say like just check which test that you need, because if you don't have the right test, you won't be allowed to travel. And you cannot board, like you cannot even check in your luggage or anything like that without having these tests that are valid. So pay attention to that. And I think the next question that was asked was how were their flight prices? So for us, we had planned to go to Zambia. I'm sorry if I'm speaking fast. I just feel like I might be speaking fast, but we had planned to go to Zambia last year. So we had already booked the tickets, but we couldn't go because there was lockdown. We wanted to go in March. So because we couldn't travel, they gave us a voucher. So it also meant that we couldn't book with another airline. We had booked with KLM, so we could only use our voucher with KLM. So we booked those tickets again, and the prices were around 700, 800 euros. But since we already had the vouchers, we only had to top up a certain amount of money. But the difference now was that we decided to go for insurance, because the first time we booked, we didn't go for insurance, but this time we did. And they were offering insurance as well in case you couldn't travel because of COVID or other circumstances, you were delayed with your train or your taxi or whatever. So that was definitely something that we did this time, just in case, you never know. So another question was, how was it like wearing masks the whole time? So the moment we left our apartment around 1, we took a taxi to Mannheim and we took a train from Mannheim to the airport. So from that moment we entered the taxi, we were wearing masks. But the good thing about Frankfurt Airport is that you can, you can go in and out. If you're not in transit, you can go in and out easily. So what we did was we arrived at the airport around 2 in the morning, and boarding time was already only around 5, and we still needed to take the other antigen test. So what we did was we went outside from time to time. It was quite cold, but it was better to breathe in some cold, fresh air instead of just breathing with the mask. So actually from around 5 till 1 a.m. the next day, we had our masks on almost continuously. We only took them off for eating, for drinking, but you had to wear your mask. I would say that I imagined it to be worse because I work from home, and I hardly wear a mask except when I'm going to church or I'm going to the store, and that's not every day. So I expected it to be much more difficult, but at the end of the day, it was quiet. It went smoother than I expected. So it wasn't too bad, and you eventually get used to it, and it's still breathable. And in the plane, they did a lot of air conditioning, and they were refreshing the air frequently, so that was okay. And you also have to change your mask quite frequently, so it works out. And to be honest, sometimes I was drinking a lot because I didn't want to wear it the whole time. So I would be drinking water, or I'll be asking for tea and things like that, so I would have time to just breathe normally, in a sense. So then the next question that was also asked was, how is COVID in Zambia? But before I got to that, actually, I'll just tell you about my experience on the flight. Sorry, I have to unlock my phone. So then on the flight, how was that like? I would say that some parts it was crowded, and that I found they couldn't maintain the social distancing on the plane. I noticed that some people that were not from the same household were allowed to sit together, and I guess that's understandable because they did the test and it was negative, so there was no risk of infection or anything. But I still found that a bit of a disadvantage because you just still never know. You're just so used to keeping distance, and then suddenly you have to sit next to somebody who you don't even know at all. So that was a bit weird. Luckily, on our first flight from Frankfurt to Amsterdam, we actually, I reserved seats for us at the back of the flight. So that meant when we actually got in, my husband had 2 seats to himself and I had 2 seats to myself. I think it was only from Amsterdam to Nairobi that it was different. So in Amsterdam to Nairobi, we were quite close to other people, and there were still a lot of empty chairs. Not so many people are traveling, that there's still quite a number of people traveling. I was a bit surprised by that because I expected the airports to be more, much more empty, but it was quite full. The plane itself was also, I would say 50% to 60, 70% full. So there were still some empty spaces. But I think they also need to balance the plane and everything with the luggage, so they are sort of forced to put people together. So that was just the disadvantage. And the other thing was that our flight from Amsterdam to Nairobi, it was 10 hours. And in the first hour, they gave us a towel, and I'll show the picture, a towel and a bottle of water, a 500 ml bottle of water. And then we didn't receive anything until an hour, 1.5 hours before landing. They gave us a little sandwich, a panini actually. And I was disappointed because they of course said due to COVID we're not going to be having the usual meals and everything, but one sandwich for 10 hours, and we left super early in the morning. So that was I imagine other people who wanted to eat more for sure. And they weren't given as many drinks either. You always had to go to the back or call them to give you drinks. So that was that was very disadvantageous. I think they're taking advantage for sure. They're taking advantage of the situation to give below average service. So that was not so nice, for sure. In the plane itself, those were the 2 things I would really say that were a bit weird and very not customer friendly. So then I was also asked would I recommend traveling now? I would say no. Guys, like the number of tests that you have to do is just ridiculous. We have to do, for the whole duration, like for the whole journey, I would have to do about 5 tests. So there's the test for leaving, and then I had the antigen test, and then again I'll have to do the PCR test and the antigen test. But then I'll go into quarantine, and then to end my quarantine I have to do a test. So that's five tests. Of course, I think the normal number is actually just 3, but because we're going through the Netherlands and they're requiring that you do an antigen test, it ends up being 5. I would definitely recommend not booking with KLM, like because of that reason. It's just so complicated to get this antigen test 4 hours before departure. I think it's very unreasonable to ask that from people. So I would not recommend traveling now. And honestly, like I really wanted to travel, and I'm happy I traveled. But if things were different, I wouldn't have traveled. And I think for the next major trip that we'll do, I would just wait for us to get a vaccine. Like I am pro vaccine passports after this experience. Before I was like, no, I don't want to take the vaccine. I'm not so sure with the mRNA vaccine. Of course, like I'm not open for every type of vaccine, but like certain types of vaccines I am open for. And I think it's just easier because you have a passport, it shows that you're vaccinated. With all these tests, like there's so many rules per country, like some are saying 24 hours, others are saying 48 hours, some are saying 7 days. So like it just makes it very complicated. And then in the weekends, the labs are not always open, and no, like you don't want to go through that for sure. I'm telling you the truth. So I would not recommend traveling now. I would definitely say, like, if you want to travel now, like travel within Europe or travel within your country, things like that. But if you want to do like intercontinental travels, like going from Africa to Europe or America or whatever, like it's not that deep. Like you can wait for sure. It's really not that deep. And I think then the last question is, no, the second to last question is coming back to Europe more complex? Yes. For sure. I mean, coming to Zambia, we needed 7 days, so it worked out well. But then, going to Europe, like going back to Germany, it's 48 hours. My test should be done within 48 hours, so it makes it really hard. I mean, it takes about 24 hours just to travel. So imagine 48 hours. It's just, yeah, that's definitely harder. You have quarantine, and a lot of times, like, Europe doesn't want people to come at all. So yeah, it's definitely more complex for sure. And the Netherlands requires a lot. I'm not happy with KLM or the Netherlands right now. So then the next question, the last question was actually, how is COVID in Zambia? So COVID in Zambia, well, like as you know, the South African variant is very prevalent right now. And it's a high-risk area, so it's not recommended travel. And I mean, when I was telling people like, yeah, we're going to Zambia, people were like, you know, it's a high-risk area. And I was like, yeah, but it's like home. So they have that variant, but overall, I have this feeling like life has sort of continued in a sense. Like people, the restaurants are open, the cinemas are open. Like a lot of things that are closed in Europe are open here. And people, not everyone is wearing masks. At the same time, I feel like people are not taking it seriously. And I've also let down my guard. Like I've been going to some crowded places, and I've been going to restaurants, and like for Women's Day was quite crowded, but it just felt like having a bit of my normal life back, and I enjoyed it. But at the same time, like after you come back from those places, you wonder like, did I catch COVID? And you start to worry. So I think that's also the disadvantage of like having things open, because you have it in the back of your mind like, I'm not safe. Even though you like enjoy the moment, afterwards you start to wonder, like you start having a cough, you're like, hey, or if you start just having like some symptoms that relate to COVID, you suddenly start thinking that maybe I'm infected, and then you have to think of like all the people you were hanging out with and the people you are living with at home. So yeah, and Zambia has been really affected by the tourism. Like it's a very touristic country, so because people have not been traveling, the tourism is suffering quite a bit. I'll be sharing a video later about our trip to South Luangwa. We went to a lodge and we were literally the only people there because people are just not coming. But they're hoping with the vaccine that more people will come in the next season, in the next high season, which starts from October to May. Like October, I think it's from May to December. That's when they have the high season. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed thing. Like being here, sometimes I do wonder, but like, yeah, I know it's real. Like, I know people have had COVID and things like that, but it's just a bit different. So I hope you enjoy this video, and do not forget to subscribe, and I'll be producing some really nice content about my trip, so stay tuned.